Hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to our webinar, How to Build and Measure Digital Skills Within an Organisation. We've got two great speakers with us today, Melanie Robinson and Will Joske. Melanie and Will are both colleagues of mine in BIM-Academy. I'll allow both of them to do their introductions. They've got some great slides to show everyone. Melanie's a project manager in BIM-Academy based in the UK here. With a lot of industry experience, currently working on some very interesting projects, which she'll tell you about. And she's also just completing her PhD at Edinburgh Napier University, looking at competence-related barriers to effective BIM adoption. Will Joske is Director of BIM-Academy in Australia and New Zealand. He's based in Melbourne, an architect by background, a lot of experience currently helping organisations with their digital adoption. So there's going to be two presentations. I'll hand over to Mel shortly. She'll then pass on to Will. If you have any questions during the presentations, please use the Q&A function on the Teams ribbon, and we'll be gathering those questions and reading those out and getting responses from the panel towards the end. And we'll be recording the webinar, so it'll be available afterwards. And I think just by way of a bit of introduction, BIM-Academy was established nearly 10 years ago, and when we first established, we thought this could be a transitional organisation that really helps the industry just through a 3 or 4 year period while we adopt these new digital tools and processes which were just emerging. Here we are 10 years later. The industry is still on a bit of a journey. Competency in the industry is probably not where it should be. The quality of information processed and produced in the industry is probably not where it should be. So I think competency has never been more important, and digital competency has certainly never been more important. And as Mel will explain, BIM was seen, particularly in the UK, as a critical change agent by the government 2010, 2011. But there's still a significant gap between the expectation where the industry could be and where it is in reality. So there's still a lot of challenges for us to face. So with no more ado, I will hand over to Melanie to start her presentation. Thanks, Melanie.
Thanks, Peter. So as Peter quite nicely introduced, my name's Melanie. I am a project manager. And I'm going to be speaking today about looking at competency from the perspective of the individual. In my view, it all starts with the individual before it even reaches the organisational level. But first, I just want to give a bit of a tiny background as to what I do in BIM-Academy, and it's a varied role. I do undertake many functions across the practice, but one of the key ones in relation to digital skills is looking at the strategic change management for clients. And one of the flagship projects that we've got going on at the moment is a really exciting one, and it's the picture on the screen, is a golden copper mine in Greece. Well, actually, it's a series of golden copper mines in northern Greece, owned by an organisation called Hellas Gold, and we're working with them to transition them from very analogue processes, very reliant on paper-based mechanisms, one-way communication streams, and transitioning them to a world that is more digitally enabled. And it's a really exciting time for us because it means that we are applying the principles of building information modelling to the mining industry, which is new for us, but it's also new for in terms of how we're applying the new ISO standards. We're moving away from the idea of building information modelling and moving towards a world that is about better information management. And the reason I bring it up in the context of digital skills is because we are rolling out a wide-reaching training strategy to help these guys and to bring them along with us on this journey. And it's turning into a really interesting piece in how we tackle that in an industry that hasn't really experienced anything like this before. And what we're finding is that in the mining industry, there's a lot of shouting and hollering about the exciting parts of digital, like your AR and VR. But it's all about setting these foundations in place and making sure that the data is being leveraged to the best of its abilities. And that's what we're doing here, which is, again, really exciting. So you can read more about that on our website, or you can email me after the presentation if you'd like to know a bit more. So for those of you that attended our last webinar, you'll have noticed that Dan Rossiter shared this image from BIM Plus magazine. But for those of you that have never seen this before, it's important to reiterate it. It's all about the knowledge gap between BIM and pretty much everything else. And what BIM Plus magazine did was map out using their wiki, the Designing Buildings wiki, to see using heat map where focus was being focused, huh? And what was found was that BIM was so separate to everything else. Everything else was interrelated, but BIM sits on its own little island. And what this tells us is that it's just not integrated enough. And yet BIM basically establishes the foundations to pretty much everything we do in the design and construction process, and more importantly, in the operations. So what I'm going to do is show you a bit of data that was collected a couple of years ago, looking at BIM understanding and adoption. And I know there's going to be people saying, but the levels aren't a thing anymore, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But what this basically did was take the amount of people that claim to have adopted BIM, and in this instance, we're looking at about 74%, and look at how many people thought that which level they were at according to what we know in the UK as the BIM levels. And what this showed was really quite eye-opening. So considering that the level 2 was the mandate for us here in the UK and formed much of the basis for a lot of the mandates around the world as well, only a few people, well, about half of the sample claimed they were using level 2. But if we look at the BIM wedge, which is now outdated, but it still holds true in what we're discussing here, is that the people saying that they were at level 0, level 1 and level 3 may have not understood the term BIM. Because if we break it down, level 0 is not really BIM. Level 0 is working in traditional manners, using very paper-based mechanisms and relying on CAD, with no intelligence linked to the information, like the graphical information, and it wasn't using object-oriented modelling that we use now. Then you've got level 1, which is a bit BIM-y, if you want to put a term to it, in that we introduce the collaborative working space through what we call a common data environment and using file naming conventions. And to bring it back to the standards, which will be mentioned quite a few times today, this was underpinned by the very first BS 1192 standard, and this will be important in a minute. Then we've got level 3, which wasn't really defined, and we've kind of moved past that point now where level 3 probably won't be defined because we've moved on to a bigger and better journey underpinned by the ISO standards. But it's important to realise that it wasn't really a thing, in that the idea was it would be one integrated model that everyone worked out at any one point. But we didn't get to that point where the technology would enable us, nor the intellectual property laws, or it was all a very complicated situation. So this left us really with level 2 being the big boy of the mandate. But breaking that down even further and looking at the level 2, or those that claim they can use level 2, you get a more interesting and nuanced picture. So, for example, I mentioned the BS 1192 standard. Well, as you can see, only a portion of those that claim they can use level 2 and level 1 claim that they could use BS 1192 or understood BS 1192 and what it stood for, which is a bit concerning, really, considering, as I say, it's the foundations to level 1 and the foundations to level 2. But again, if we dig even deeper with that, you'll see that only a few actually always use a common data environment. So you can see that there is a bit of a gap between rhetoric and reality, and for me, this comes down to the efficiency or the efficacy of upskilling practices across the industry. Our industry has always been blighted with challenges. It's nothing new, and we've all heard about your Egans and your Lathams. But in later days, we've come across reports looking at level 2, how efficient was it, and did it work? Was it actually realised? Was adoption realised? Well, this is the thing. If we're going to be moving on to bigger and better things, and we already are when it comes to the likes of digital twins and smart infrastructure projects, we need to get the basics right, and we need to make sure that the industry is coming with us on this journey. But if we didn't get it right the first time round, why is it, and what can we do about it? And more to the point, what can we do to make sure that we are not repeating the mistakes of the past? And I've included the images of the Egan and Latham reports. And for those that aren't in the UK here, the Egan and Latham reports were massive reports that came out in the 1990s, aiming to reinvigorate the construction industry because it is so inefficient. But the thing is, what happened was best practice happened as that. It was best practice in small pockets of the industry. It wasn't a widespread solution. So we need to stop the same thing happening again. So this is where I think the ISOs come in, and where I think they have shifted how we view upskilling and how we view digital competency. And that's because even though capability assessments have always been part of our BIM journey through our PAS 91, that's another standard thrown in there, and through the 1192 suite, it's shifted the focus from just plain ability to capability being a sum of education or knowledge and training skills, which I think is a really interesting way of looking at it, because it's differentiating between applied knowledge and essential knowledge. So building on that, the ISO standards introduce the mobilization phase. And I think this is an incredibly untapped resource that we can make use of to really understand where we're at in our digital journey, in our own digital journey as well. And I'll show you how I've applied that to the individual. But the crux of it, in terms of mobilization within the ISO standards, is that we follow this linear route where we undertake our assessment during tendering, and we assess our task team's capability and capacity, and we collate that and we have a look at it and we say, okay, where do the gaps lie in terms of the exchange information requirements? So the requirements that the client puts in place. And okay, yeah, that's a bit limited to focusing just on what the client wants, but it's a great step forward, because what the ISOs do is basically say, okay, we don't expect everyone to be BIM proficient or BIM amazing, and we expect there to be a learning curve. So this is what is called a mobilization plan, and that's how that fits in, is that those that are tendering put together a mobilization plan that suggests how they would plug these gaps, whether it's through training or education, or whether it's the procurement of hardware or software in a capacity form. And I just pulled this quote out of an upskilling briefing paper published by the UK BIM Alliance a couple of years ago, because I think it really drives home the point about competency being at the centre of everything that we do here. And here in the UK, we've had a rough couple of years with the collapse of Carillion, a massive contractor here, and of course the Grenfell fire, which unfortunately made news globally. But off the back of that, the Hackett report was published, or Building a Safer Future, which introduced the concept of a golden thread, which is probably what you've heard when you hear about the Hackett report. But also it has mentioned the idea of competency, and competency or its variations have been mentioned 236 times in the report. So really, really focusing on the fact that competency is a crucial element in our digital journey. So what is digital competency? So bringing it right back to the topic that we're focusing on today. So I define it as 4 areas: knowledge, skills, experience, and attitude. And together these form your digital competency. But I know that critics in the past have said, okay, well, not everyone in the team needs to have the same level of competency as everyone else. And a good example being a plumber in comparison to a design consultant, particularly when we think of BIM, which is very information heavy, and a lot of data is being generated at early stages. Whereas the plumber is more restricted to needing to know about what they're installing and how they're installing it and how that data carries through with the asset information requirements and COBE. But what I would argue is that actually it's the case of the six blind men and the elephant. So I rephrase this to say, okay, well, if we take each of our six blind men and think of them as experts in their own areas, they need to know everything about their area. So a tusk expert needs to know absolutely everything about ivory and the elephant's tusk. But at the end of the day, these six men or women need to know that they're looking at an elephant, and it's an accepted fact, and they know all they need to know about the fact that this animal is an elephant. So what I mean by this in terms of digital skills or even competency as in a generalized form is that we have a core competency set that we all need to meet. So everyone around the table, when there's a design team meeting, need to have some sort of core or essential understanding or comprehension of what they're doing, whether it is knowledge or skills or even attitude. But then everyone within the design team will have their own specific tailored set of competencies that they'll need to tailor to suit themselves, to suit the role, to suit their organization. But the trouble is, with the sudden introduction of BIM, what's happened is that the upskilling provision or the upskilling landscape has become hugely varied in what's available on the market, and it can be really quite daunting. How do you know what's what, or the quality of some of these offerings? And it's incredibly daunting for an individual to look at. But in reality, it's not necessarily about what is being provided as much as it is about looking at what it will give you for your career and for your role. And the idea is that no one solution will fit everybody. It will need to be tailored to some extent, and I think that's the message I want you to go home with today, or stay home if you're still working from home, is being able to realise what is valuable to you as an individual versus what is, well, simply irrelevant. So building on that, if we view the organisation as a sum of its parts, we can take these competencies and build up an organisational competency, or the profile, a digital skills profile of the organisation, using the individuals as assets. They're not just numbers. And the way I see this is breaking each employee down into their own capabilities. They will have all gone through their own journeys. So if I think of bimacademy, and we're quite a small team, but each one of us has gone through a vastly different journey, and with that we can bring our own skills and knowledge to the team and reach that common goal that we're all aiming for. And we can get these skills and knowledge and even our attitude and experience through different manners, whether it's through certification schemes or education, or we've gone through a training course online for a piece of software. This all builds us up and builds our profile up. But it's all about, okay, well, what is the goal? And I know that the goal will always be a moving target. Learning doesn't stop, and it's incredibly relevant in the context of digital because we haven't stopped our digital journey. BIM is not the end of the road by any stretch of the imagination. But what it does is setting some form of interim target means that we can focus on what we need to do to be able to assimilate these competencies a lot easier in the future. So it's a big learning curve at the start, and then it should taper off. So then building a digital skills roadmap, what does that look like? Well, if we envisage our competency to be a series of building blocks that I've shown here, we can map out an individual's journey, whether it's via education, whether it's through some form of certification or training scheme, or whether it's getting some form of license for a piece of software. And it's, again, tailoring it to the individual. So with that, I'd like to hand over to my Aussie colleague, Will, who will talk to you about skills and purpose and use, and bring it all the way back to digital skills and how to measure them.
Thanks, Melanie, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy day to listen into our webinar today. As you heard, my name is Joske. I am part of bimacademy down here in Melbourne, Australia, and I've put together some slides for you today, which I think will work very well in respect to what Melanie's presented to you so far. When we were talking about what we could present today, I wanted to think about something that would be engaging as possible, and I've been reflecting on a lot of conversations I've had recently, and particularly ones which have struck a chord with the people that we work and consult with. So what I thought I'd bring along today to show you was about the notion of having purpose in what you do, and how purpose needs to be placed at the foundation of all the work that we are committed to do. How skills, methods, procedures, use cases, and so on have to stay connected to purpose. And linked to the idea of purpose is to have an objective, and I use that phrase a lot in working with our clients in strategic advisory, particularly in terms of setting up projects. Objective really is such a key thing. The objective can be created to deliver an innovation, an efficiency, better accuracy, or something else that has value. And so in turn, the objective should deliver a benefit, a project deliverable, a return on investment, something physical or intangible, immediate or longer term.
Well, your slides aren't coming up.
Oh, okay, they're not working. All right, we need to go into discovery mode here, people. Oh, there we go. How's that? Can you see me now? My slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry about that, folks. Don't worry, I didn't miss much. Mostly it looked like that without the beautiful water in it. So what I'm going to present today isn't a solution to anything and everything. Rather, I just wanted to have a bit of a walk through a number of thought processes and logical steps and opinions that I've had going around in my head for quite a long time. Because it's really great to try to put order and structure into the way that we think about things so that we can better communicate them to others. And really, that's where the really good conversation can start to take place, when we can express something, give it some structure, get people to understand where we're coming from. And I hope that after today's webinar, you'll be able to have some meaningful conversations, and that we've struck a chord with you as well. So let's have a look into that. First of all, just a few slides about me, if you can indulge me just for a moment. I'm a lot older than Melanie, so I've had a few different things so far in my career. It started off, I went to the University of Melbourne, basically. I did architecture back in the day, but growing up, I guess this is sort of where something sort of twigged. I got a Commodore VIC-20. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember what that was like, for Christmas. And because of that, I failed my Year 7 history exam, and my father was very upset with me for quite a long time over that. And when I was at uni, I really liked how computers, so when I was young, sort of playing with the VIC-20, and when I went to uni as well, started studying architecture and got into computers, I just loved how they could be used for creative purposes. There was this beautiful flexibility and instant feedback and gratification that you could get by using them. So it was interesting then that after graduating, what I did is I started a business off with a friend, doing a few things, but as well as architecture and some graphic design, we also did architectural visualization, and there's a few versions of what we did in the early days on the screen there as well. We were building 3D models and rendering them using AutoCAD to do 3D modeling based off the plans and elevations that were sent to us by the architects. And sort of really I remember sort of, you know, thinking back at the time, sort of like this, we've got it back to the front here, where we're doing the three-dimensional sort of representation so far down the track. You know, it really should be the other way around. Later on in my career, I went back into architecture, and that's where we got into Revit, which in fact was exactly what I'd been thinking of. This was a three-dimensional workflow, and you could become much a better designer from it. But later on, my career broadened out into the bigger world of building information modelling when I got a job at a multidisciplinary engineering firm, and I was the practice BIM manager for architecture there. And these were the days where you could put a McLeamy curve into a presentation and people were still impressed. So those were the good old days. But it was the beginning of my learning of how complex our industry is, about how complex the transition to digital skills is, and how we're not paying attention to the fact that this is just not only a technical problem for us to solve. So, as part of BIM-Academy, every client and every project is a new opportunity to listen, learn and solve problems. And the icing of the cake is to apply and share knowledge in conversations like this. And also, I'm part of Swinburne University of Technology's Pathway for Advanced Vocational Education, and we're brewing up some new online learning and future face-to-face work training workshops based on this as well. So this is me. I'm a sum of a lot of these different things, and I think that's enough introductions. Let's get on to it. First little chapter, the cart before the horse. So this is something that, again, sort of casting my mind back to sort of the things that you see in the workplace. I'm going to refer a lot to sort of the workplace and workplace situations and what we see. Something that we've all got the potential to do is to lose sight of our purpose when we're distracted by something bright and shiny, right? It's the bright and shiny things like using a drone to capture photogrammetry of a project that's just been constructed, for instance. Or maybe that bright and shiny thing is a complex script to solve a problem in your BIM authoring software. I'm not saying that either of these clever things are bad. I'm just putting forward the question of whether are they delivering value? They're delivering value to the person, value to the project, value to the organisation, value to the client, value to the greater good. Are they of value at that moment? So a little, again, going back to my history a little bit, but I just wanted to, I think this is a nice story that sort of drives this point home, an important point. Before I was learning and living rabbiting on about BIM, as I mentioned, I was an architect. And when I was doing my university degree, it was the time when AutoCAD, in fact, was only just sort of starting to infiltrate, more so in workplace, and it was just coming in on universities. And while studying, yeah, so I was just making a point. There was very much a generational change, just as the way generational change is happening at the moment as well. So my first job was my first boss, and he often got frustrated at how long plans took to actually draft on the computer. So he figured he could actually draw a lot faster with his pencil than we could certainly draft on the computer. But he had this really annoying habit that if he just scribbled more and more and more, he could make all the lines join up. And then us poor CAD jockeys, just straight out of uni, were trying to join his sketches up. And, you know, they're hundreds of mils out all the time. And so we would roll our eyes and say, geez, that Jeff, you know, he's such an old school Luddite. But the thing is that whilst we thought he was too old school to understand the new kids on the block, he, of course, had a greater purpose in mind. The sketch designs that he was working on needed to get to the client quickly and efficiently as possible. And did we, as starting out with our technical skills, but not a lot of professional skills, did we understand that? So whether it was with my old boss's blue clutch pencil or simulating one with software, the point of being employed in that office was to give the client what had been agreed on. While we were technically really good at the job, potentially in comparison to my old mate Jeff anyway, we were young as far as our profession goes. So the moral of the story, our little story here, is that the question is there really a big difference between getting lost in AutoCAD drafting hexagonal bolts for printing at 1 to 20 to building a complex Revit window family, LOD 500, that's never, the detail is never going to be seen or used in that model deliverable at all. Obviously, the answer is no. Whether, even though the technology's changed, we're still facing many of the same issues. So, staying delivery focused, let's talk a little bit more about project delivery. I've been using architecture as an example because I'm familiar with it, but I trust you'll see the same principles applies to so many other professions within our industry. Success in our profession is going to lie in how well your team can execute and manage the digital skills of delivery. Individual skills combining to build the organisation's capability. Project delivery relies on the capability of individuals and the organisation as a whole. I've put together a little timeline that we'll use just to help illustrate some of the points I'm making. The names on the project stages change depending on where you are, of course. These ones are from the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy down here in Melbourne. There are a set of guidelines for delivering projects here that will be influential in other states in Australia as well. You can see that you could say that these guidelines are kind of like a regional annex to the ISO 19650 standards. Just saying there is some voice coming through on one of my colleagues' microphones if you just want to check your mute. Let's think about how these stages could be efficiently linked to, need to be efficiently linked to deliver on the central objective. And that central objective to doing business in our industry is delivering that built asset. And because someone signed us up to the 4th industrial revolution without our consent, we're delivering the project information model as well. It's the information documents, the smart models, and the structured data. Now, did I press the button? Come on, button, off we go. There we go. We want to deliver the built asset and the virtual asset. We want to also do masterfully clever things along the way that deliver benefit to the process as well. For the process, for the delivery, we want to do these things better with quality and efficiency and better than the competition. And hey, maybe make some profit as well. That's always been the way. We call it digital at the moment because we're adapting, but this is business as usual, right? At some point, digital engineering will just be back to engineering itself. So I wanted to have a little look at how there's a synergy of skills. Again, this is sort of my working through sort of the thoughts and creating structure around things to better sort of drive thoughts and focus. Let's have a look at the next slide. There we go. Our interest in capturing skills infers we have a point in doing so. You might be a director of an organisation, a person with responsibility to manage BIM and digital engineering, or you might be on the tools but sick and tired of people always cutting corners and creating problems for people down the track. What are the ways in which we can capture skills and how do we measure them objectively? How do we engage with individuals and groups to uplift digital skills? Does every single worker have to become a super hacker digital extreme edition 4.0 worker, or is there a more valid approach to allow for specialization? And are digital skills exclusive of the professional role that you play in an organization? The answer, of course, is no to that. On one hand, there are the skills that are necessary to ensure the delivery of a profession. Our architect friend must communicate across multiple channels, drawing visuals, reports, specifications, presentations, communicating the solutions and so on. These are the skills that in one way or another are transforming into digital versions of themselves. Then there are the skills that are particular to the profession, a role to play within the life cycle of the asset. For the architect, it's the job of distilling the opportunities and constraints of a project in order to arrive at a design solution. A creative problem at its finest, a physical asset that both functions and has a pleasing aesthetic. Or if it doesn't, you just grow ivy over it, I guess. But on the left are the skills that serve the profession, but the level of success that you can achieve within your profession is starved by a poor ability to deliver. So this is sort of the last chapter of the presentation we're at now. And it's based on some work I've been doing assisting a group called the Australian BIM Academic Forum. What we're set out to do is to define a framework for common understanding and language of competencies for BIM to be used in training and education entities, the universities, TAFEs and registered training organisations in Australia. We decided that we'd use BIM uses as the building blocks for trying to work this work out, from which the competencies and dependencies and so on could be mapped. We wanted to test our ideas with what had been done before, considering also our current industry context and our aspirations too. Could we maybe describe BIM skills in a more simplified way, or could we put them into a new structure that would make better sense to us? No doubt you've seen some examples of this before on the screen there. We've got Penn State's BIM uses. But also there's other sources and opinions, and this has been done a few times, certainly in the past. These are Building Smart's same mapping of BIM uses as well. Notice also it's quite interesting to me that we've got a lot of BIM uses within the operation phase of an asset. Some of the things that we workshopped and considered: what was going to be the core of BIM, if there was a core? What would be some things that would build out from that, extend and improve? What are some of the relationships? We wanted a better structure. What can plug into it? How do they relate to each other, and so on? There was lots to consider, and there was a lot of interesting points of view on this when we workshopped it. One of the most interesting conversations to me has been the difference between digital engineering and BIM. In fact, whether there is one, or do we use those terms interchangeably, and does it help to make a difference between them? There we go, well done. I clicked some more screens, so let's go to the next one. The conclusion I've drawn from that last question about the what's at core and differences between digital engineering and BIM. Let's start at the core of BIM. Is that I think that it comes down to this simple diagram here, which is the ability to have an unbroken chain of managing models and data through the stages of procurement to handover and operations and maintenance. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Each one of those grey boxes is a BIM use based on a purpose, and just DAM stands for digital asset management, which we see as a different model deliverable distinct from an as-built deliverable. Just noting here too, just that other question about the separation of BIM and facilities management is the way that BIM and operations, asset management, smart precincts and cities and digital twins need to be more carefully considered when it comes to BIM uses, in my opinion. The BIM component of these solutions needs to be maintained by re-entering that same core process, but that's a discussion perhaps for another seminar. So we've got our core up at the top, and benefiting from that core process through the different stages of procurement are these use cases that I've just brought up on the screen there that can work directly from the model and data. Things like the visualization, clash detection, using visualization for safety and risk, value engineering, inspecting the model for quality assurance, and so on, as you can see. The idea is that to some degree or another, these uses work directly from the information in the BIM models. What is understood, insights gained, agreements reached from these activities can be fed back into the core process, usually sort of in a manual type of process. But the idea here is that we've got this consistent core process going on, and these BIM uses or these use cases are easily dropped out of that process. In the next level, we've got uses that are able to affect and modify or improve the BIM information through more automated analysis or other types of inputs. We're doing more with the data, if you like, for another way of saying it. For example, engineering analysis with the within this authoring software, like structural engineering, or perhaps some fantastic setup where we've got RFID tracking that changes the attributes of model elements to differentiate them from others that have not arrived on site or been installed yet. So we're getting fairly complex, so let's bring it back to the idea of what we're talking about tonight, about skills. If we wanted to simplify the framework for delivering BIM, then let's do the same thing for skills here. At the core, good modelling practices, data capture and management, facilitating the exchange of models and data, and with that the need for model and data fidelity, open standards and so on. I think that an organisation that works on improving their technical ability in these areas and finds the methods by which they can be meshed with the professional skills and experience will surely be at an advantage to others. And outside of the core, those skills that improve and enhance that process of delivery. So this is potentially where you could decide how members in your team can specialise, whereas it can be argued that everyone in the organisation is skilled in the necessity of the core function of BIM, which of course would differentiate between the technical and the managerial in the executive roles. So we'll probably leave it there. As I said, it was just a series of thought processes and logical steps to try to bring more structure and focused thought to how these issues can play out in the workplace to help with strategies and conversations. And I hope that that it'll help you and your future conversations and plans as well.
Okay, thanks, Will. It's great. Thanks, Melanie, as well, for your previous presentation there. It's great to see there's some questions come in. The first one is actually from Milrillo Piazzi, who's asked, well, thanks for the informative presentation directed at Melanie. What exactly do you mean by the attitude component and how would you measure it? I'm thinking of how would you put this component into a skill assessment form, for example. Melanie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's an absolutely fair question, considering that the existing capability assessments are very much tailored to hard evidence of knowledge and skills. But really, attitude to me anyway is probably the most important one, because you've got to have the attitude to learn. And that is very interwoven into attitude regarding the whatever the organisation is trying to do, and whether you're on board with it. In terms of being able to measure it, there's plenty of existing scales out there on the market, and I would recommend a constant, regular surveying of staff, so you can get a longitudinal perspective of attitudinal changes or status of the staff and how they feel. And by doing that, you as an organisation can work with the staff to identify maybe barriers to learning, or whether there's something that isn't sitting quite right with your staff. As I've mentioned in my presentation, I truly believe the individual is the key to unlocking the benefits of digital. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. The next question, do you feel the COVID pandemic, i.e. working from home, is driving forward digital skills and digital transformation? Will, do you want to take that one?
It's probably a bit of a forwards and backwards, I think, would be the answer for that. Certainly, people have to come up with better technical solutions to deliver on projects in a situation where so many people are working remotely. But I think there's going to be a lot of frustration in terms of being able to identify and manage the actual skills that go into the delivery of these projects. To be honest, I think that it's hard, and people have a hard enough time trying to get consistency in standards of delivery of projects when everyone's in the office together, and holding meetings and sending communications out and being able to visit people at their desks and looking over their shoulders and get a gauge on what's happening. I think that a long-term working remotely, I think we'll find that we will possibly have problems in that area with a lack of being able to have that more direct interaction with our teams and to get a better sense of how they're performing. Probably the answer to some of those problems will be more rigid structures on how we examine the actual outputs of projects. Again, I've got my architect's hat on here, but putting in processes by where projects are better audited and putting systems in place and better protocols and so on, it's probably a great opportunity to put into place a lot more rigorous types of protocols and information and knowledge bases than perhaps we would have done in the past.
Okay, great, thanks. Next question is what is the best method to assess digital skills, and what are the available solutions for BIM organisations? Melanie, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's some really basic assessment forms that have been developed for the purposes of in the BIM world of understanding the capability of organizations. But we're actually working on something at the moment in terms of developing some sort of skills matrix or assessment for a particular organization, and we'll be looking at how effective that is, because I can absolutely guarantee that something needs to be done in terms of developing a suitable method, a bit of a catch-all method. But as a starter for 10, I would definitely start looking at some of the assessments surrounding capability and capacity, and especially specifically in a ISO 19650 format. Great.
The next question, I think I'll have a go at answering this one to start with, and then you two can join in. This one's, I'm curious to know what your opinion is on what's the best strategy in engaging with company general management to get them on board. After the evaluation. How do you best engage with them to deploy your strategy? So, in our experience of working in BIMacademy, when we've been helping organisations with their digital roadmaps, I think one of the most important things is to engage at a senior level with, or to understand the ultimate business goals of the organisation. What are the problems they're facing? What are the fundamental business objectives that aren't being achieved through how they currently manage their information? And if you can get to the heart of that with the senior team, it also really flows from there. And so gaining access to that person and having the right conversation with them at the outset, I think, is really very fundamental. Any thoughts from either of you on that one?
Yeah, I agree, Peter. If I could put my 2 cents in on that, I think digital literacy for the executive team is such an important thing. One of the themes in my presentation was that idea that that what we want to drive in a practice is delivering upon objectives, and I think without that measure of digital literacy, those senior people within the organisation find it difficult to understand what the processes are and what functions people are doing, and why they're investing in people doing certain things, because they don't understand what the benefits are, or perhaps they don't have enough clarity to understand whether in fact that is a beneficial process that's been invested in, or whether in fact they're not going to derive much benefit from it at all. And the problem with that second type of situation is, of course, it doesn't create a winning story that encourages more investment in the future. So I think it's very much how you do it, whether they're kicking and streaming or incentivized or whatever it might be, is that you try to bring a greater understanding and to demystify and to simplify and bring plain English into the conversations that you have with your senior management teams.
Okay, Melanie, any further thoughts on that?
No, I think you guys have covered it really quite well. I've got
okay. Great. The last question that's come in, and I would encourage anybody, if you've got any final questions, please submit them, and we'll pick them up after this one. This last question's, many thanks for your presentation. Competency is multi-dimensional. Is your definition limited to just the 4 you outlined? For example, what about behaviours? Now, you could argue that behaviours and attitude similar, but Melanie, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's not an exclusive definition by any stretch of the imagination. It's something when I've been thinking about it in terms of how do we measure it and how do we capture it and how can it be used. I think something like behaviours is not well defined in itself, but it's an absolutely important part of the equation. In terms of developing a roadmap, I would maybe think it's less important, but in terms of an organisational view of their staff's capabilities, then being able to assess behaviours and how that ties in with attitudes in particular would be an incredibly useful asset, particularly for future planning purposes.
I'll add 2 cents there as well, if I could, because a conversation I had recently with a client was that idea that in terms of building more of a hierarchy within the office to try to sort of build depth into supporting BIM and digital skills within the workplace, you know, you look down at your team and say, who's going to be that person that I can call on to be that next level of sort of model manager and so on and so forth. It isn't necessarily the smartest technical person in the room. It's going to be a combination of factors, and some of which are going to be those interpersonal skills, accountability, and a willingness to be proactive and talking to other people instead of hiding in the corner waiting for the problems to come to them. Those sorts of other types of transferable skills and so on are very much part of the solution as well. But of course, we decided to just sort of limit our chat today more to the sort of the technical areas. It's very true. It needs to be a holistic approach. Okay,
a couple of more questions have come in. We've got about just under 10 minutes left, so I'll deal with these two, and if there may be another one comes in after that, who knows. Just this one picks up on the conversation earlier just about senior management and how do you get them on board. The questions: what if the senior staff and the owners are digitally illiterate? And again, if I can just pitch in on that one, I think what you've got to do is, if you're engaging with a senior management team, you don't start the conversation about digital. You start the conversation about what is the organisational challenge they're facing. For example, it could be an owner or estate owner who is struggling to retrieve reliable asset information about their estate or their systems. You know, they're saying it takes us 3 days to try and find all the records of our fire alarm tests or whatever it is. That's the fundamental problem. What you then do is translate that into how you use digital tools and processes to solve that, and then what are the skills and competence that are needed to support that. And I think that's how I would approach it. Any thoughts from you guys?
I agree with that, Peter. Okay. It's the cart before the horse, isn't it? In terms of the conversation, it's like you say, it's about identifying the problems and the solutions for them, and how you solve those solutions. You find the appropriate tool for the job. So BIM becomes, or digital engineering, or whatever it is, the tools, the people, the process becomes secondary to answering the challenge that the organisation has. But yes, I think that'll always be a challenge. Having people who pull the levers, not closing their ears when technical babble comes up. So it is an issue. I hope that whoever wrote that question can sort of try a few different approaches and be a problem solver and just sneak the technology in the back door.
Yeah.
I think this is why there's such a need for case studies and dialogue in the industry, and I just don't think there's enough of that at the moment, particularly in terms of the guys that are just starting out on this whole digital journey, whilst others have been powering ahead. It's important to remember that not everyone has embraced this yet, and I think in terms of senior management, I think they need to see quantifiable evidence that it's an investment worth making. And until we do that, I think we'll always face a challenge of getting everyone completely on board.
Okay, great. Final question that's come in is, what tools do you use to check staff skill sets, knowledge, capability, requirements? You may have covered some of that on your presentation, Melanie, but I don't know if you want to just address that one.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, in answer to another question, I don't think there are defined tools yet. It's something that we're working on in-house for our own use, and it'll be interesting to see whether it's something that we can spread out to wider applications. So at the moment, as I said, I think the most reliable one, and I use that term loosely, is the assessment forms, like the olden school CPIX ones for the PAS 1192 journey. Is a good starter for 10 in terms of capacity and capability to a very high level. So it's something that we're definitely going to be having a look at some point, and we'll need to, as an industry, as a wider conversation.
Great. I think we'd probably better wrap up there. We're pretty much out of time. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you found it engaging and interesting and useful. If you do need help, our details are on the final slide there. The recording will be made available, and we have other webinars in the pipeline on other related topics, so hopefully we can catch up with you again at a future event. So I'd just like to thank Melanie and Will, and have a great day, everybody.